I'm delighted to welcome to the program Mr. Scott J. Bloch. He is a writer and a lawyer. He grew up in Hollywood as the son of a screenwriter, and he later attended the University of Kansas, where he studied under Doctors Dennis Quinn, Franklin Nelick, and John Sr. in the now legendary Integrated Humanities Program. This experience would inspire both Scott and his wife, Catherine, to convert to the Catholic faith and would form the basis of Scott's novel, Mount Wonder, which is based on his experience in the Integrated Humanities Program. In 2001, Mr. Bloch entered government service for the Department of Justice and the President's Faith-Based Initiative. And in addition to his recent work, he is also the co-author of The Essential Belloc, along with Father C. John McCloskey, and runs the Hilaire Belloc Society in Washington, D.C., where he practices law. He is the founder, or a founder, of Wyoming Catholic College, and currently sits on the board of Thomas More College of the Liberal Arts in New Hampshire. Scott and his wife have 7 children and 14 grandchildren. Is that number still accurate?
Yes, it is. It's up to date, I think.
Well, praise God. Mr. Bloch, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
So I have so enjoyed learning more about the Integrated Humanities Program, and that has been both through my reading, but also conversations with alumni of the program. And through my conversations with people and hearing their stories, I heard about you and your work, where you have taken on the task of telling a story in a novel, which is largely based on your experience in that program. And so in this book, Mount Wonder, you base a lot of what goes on in there about this remarkable humanities program that was at the University of Kansas in the 1970s and was taught by the now legendary Doctors Quinn, Sr. and Nelick. And I'm just wondering, what about that program inspired you to write this novel?
Well, it had a profound effect on me personally. It also had a profound effect on others, and a kind of culture grew out of it, and many vocations came out of it, both monks and nuns and bishops and priests. And so it was rather a monumental event in the 1970s. And you tend to, when you go on in life, you forget about how important something was. You just think, well, that has to do with me, not other people. But then as you come into our times, in the last 10, 15, 20 years, you've seen such a ruination, such a depletion of what education is meant to be and what kind of experiences people are supposed to have, to be inspired by higher education and higher things, sublime things. And it's so denigrated that I wanted people to experience in a direct and powerful way what it felt like to go through a genuine experience of the classical kind of education, circa 1970 as opposed to 1870. But yes, really to experience that, because they've been denied that maybe, or they had it in part, or what have you. And I was lucky. And so I wanted to share that experience.
Well, the more I learn about the Integrated Humanities Program and the things that sort of brought it to fruition in terms of its birth, but also the things that it faced, a variety of challenges that eventually led to its termination, but not death. There's a legacy that has gone on where people who went through that program have continued both the philosophy of education and the pedagogy that was modeled for them there by the aforementioned professors. And I think, as your book lays out, in many ways, the story that you wrestle with there is a story that we see unfolding across college campuses worldwide, still to this day. And I wonder if you could speak to the people who are currently struggling in the radically disintegrated state of higher education.
Yes, so it's a lot harder now to find pockets of sanity and of inspiration, of teachers who are really good at what they do, and they just want to reveal the material to you, which in and of itself could be a profound thing, could be a miraculous thing to a student. not to be pounded over the head with political or sexual sort of overtones, but just to be given the beauty of, the Greek tragedies or the wonder of mathematics, for that matter. Everything's been politicized, so you have nowhere to hide. And so for people today, there's a tremendous reluctance to send one's children to college for fear of the corruption that will happen. There's students who don't want to go into an environment where their views are going to be attacked, and so there are places you can find solace and a safe port. Focus is one. Focus programs across the country and on the campuses. Newman schools, such as Bishop Conley has up in Lincoln, which has a kind of mini integrated humanities program going there. We started one at University of Kansas, which still kind of in some respects is going. So you have these adjuncts to the campuses, or even within the campuses, you have these little programs that can bring a sanity and a freedom from the political correctness, and an opportunity to delve into beauty, truth, and goodness, without being beaten up. So, but those places are difficult to find, and you have the so-called Newman schools, of which Wyoming Catholic, which I was a founder of, and Thomas More and University of Dallas and others are part of, and they certainly provide this great books kind of liberal arts education. But if you're going to go to the university or college, private or even Catholic, nominally Catholic places, it's going to be harder. You're going to have to really search for the people that carry this kind of tradition, that carry this kind of message. So, for example, if you go to Princeton, if you're lucky enough to get into Princeton, there's not going to be very many opportunities. So you better take Robbie George, and you better get into the James Madison Institute, or you're going to have some troubles. Now, you might find a professor or two that don't teach the nonsense and just are very good at what they do. And so those are good to have. And I know people who've gone to Harvard even recently who made the best of their education and enjoyed it. And there are some professors at Harvard that are good. But you got to go searching. There's 31 flavors and there are only 2 of them that are any good.
Right. So. Well, one of the things that is unique about this program is that it brought together 3 outstanding teachers, not only outstanding in the sense that they were good at their craft and that they were professionals of the highest caliber, and that was recognized, as I understand, by many people. So they were award-winning teachers, but they were also people who shared this integrated view of reality. And I wonder if you could speak to that for a minute, because there's an interesting origin story as to how this program even came to be at this state school. So maybe you could touch on that, and then maybe lead your comments into some reflection on the thing that unified these 3 professors in their pursuit of having an integrated humanities program.
Right. So the professors taught what is known as the perennial philosophy, which is that truth is unified, and that you can look at history and art and literature and poetry and math and all the subjects under one light of truth, one aspect of truth, and that the university is meant to be a single thing where all the subjects relate to each other. And they had seen the deterioration that was occurring in the university. I mean, Senior had come out of a great Ivy League tradition. He went to Columbia, studied under Mark Van Doren. Then he was in charge of the James Joyce Library at Cornell, for instance. So he had a big career, but then he converted, and then he decided that there was a kind of hopelessness, in the Ivy League. And so he wanted to go somewhere where he thought he could have some real academic freedom, and he went to Wyoming, University of Wyoming, and he had a considerable following there. In fact, that's where he met Bob Carlson, who studied under him and followed him to Kansas. So John Sr. comes to Kansas as a classics professor. Yeah, I think he had a dual appointment and tenured. And then Dennis Quinn was a tenured English professor who had a lot of renown, had won a teaching awards, and he was incredible in his own right. And then Frank Nelick also had quite a career and a following at the University of Kansas. And they both, I think, had studied under a well-known Milton scholar at Wisconsin. So you had these three who then met each other, and they started to have conversations, and even taught a couple of classes together. And then they just, in 1969 or 70, they decided, we ought to try to do something unique. There's this new college within a college system that's been formed, and we could have quite a bit of autonomy, and we could teach as we want in a 4-semester course that would satisfy a lot of requirements that students have to have for English, for Western civilization, for history, and so forth. So that was how it came together. And then they got a grant from NIH that catapulted them so that they would have a budget, they would have an office, they would have staff, they would have some travel money, and so they could do everything they wanted to do, which was to really unveil to students for the first time, as if they'd never heard of it, Western civilization, both the physical one over in Europe, and traveling there, as well as the subjects of the liberal arts, and on top of that, the experience of nature and of the arts of culture, such as dance and calligraphy and memorization of poetry and song, folk songs, and learning how to waltz and going, out in the country to fairs and doing stargazing. So it was a complete package that no one else was doing anywhere.
Well, here in a minute, I'd like to move into the specifics of the story that you have written in your novel. But before we do that, to continue setting the stage here, I'd like to talk a bit more about the details of the program, and I want to touch on something you just mentioned, which is this college within a college idea. My understanding is that was a response to some sense of something missing or a dissatisfaction among students. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Right. Well, this is a large state university, so 22,000 students, I think, at the time I went in the 1970s. And so you could get lost, among the panoply of subjects and offerings, and it was a big campus, and so students were not satisfied with the large classes, with the impersonal nature of the teaching, with the subject matter being very dry and sort of research driven, and a lot of non-tenured professors were teaching classes, and everything was moving in the direction of the giant research university, which is what we have now. And this has been charted very well by Alan Bloom in the Closing of the American Mind, and what happened with the expert graduate school kind of model. And so this college within the college idea was a response to that. Now, you also have to remember that you're in 1970, and you still have a lot of the remnants of the radical 60s movement. And so students were voicing their objections to a lot of things. But one of them was this impersonal nature of an irrelevancy, apparently, to their lives of what was being taught or how it was being taught. And when I say irrelevancy, I don't mean political. I just mean I can't relate to this, to use the jargon of the time. And so the professors saw an opportunity to do something really radical, which was do something that's very personal in nature and yet highly academically, traditional, and essentially looking backward to the wisdom of the past rather than saying we know more than everybody else and that was all bunk before. And so they also were they presented a critique of modern life and of modern living styles, and put it up against the past of the agrarian style of life, the traditional arts of family living and farming and being self-sufficient. So those things had quite a bit of currency within the program. The whole idea of small is beautiful was something you ran into in the program. It wasn't specifically taught, but it was just there. You had the notion that they were really challenging everything about what had happened to Western civilization, and it's just turned toward money and expertise and science.
Well, it's really remarkable when something so ordinary and traditional, something that's been around and it's been passed down from generation to generation, can be presented to a group of college students as something radical, and attract them in that way because maybe for some people it was just the shock of the difference of the program that sort of drew them in. But I imagine that the thing that made them stay and made them, from the many alumni I've spoken to, really changed their lives on a fundamental level was a reintroduction to things that are true, things that are good and beautiful. And I think as Dr. Senior would say, a reintroduction to reality itself. And so that's kind of hard to put on a brochure. You kind of have to experience it to know what it's like. But I would like to hear from your perspective what it was like being in the classroom with these three professors.
So it was like you would. The only thing I can compare it to is awakening from a nightmare and realizing it was a nightmare and you're back in reality and everything's okay. You just had this sense that you had emerged from the madness that you encountered in your other classes. I don't mean there were people running around doing crazy things, but you just felt like you were lost. Nobody was teaching anything. They didn't have a point of view other than what was the au courant, philosophy of do your own thing, man, and everything's okay. And trying to not step on anybody's toes and towing the liberal orthodoxy. You didn't encounter that in these classes. You were respected. So when you entered a class and you're listening to these three men who are amazing in their own right, have this great conversation, and you get to enter into the great conversation, and then you realize this great conversation you're entering into is part of a greater conversation that all of the writers and thinkers of the past have had. And it had that effect on you of bringing you into a world that you knew must exist, but you never had seen it before. And now you could settle in and really decide, I'm gonna be serious. I'm gonna learn something. So there was that. It also was challenging in the sense that the professors would ask serious questions that you didn't have the answer to, like, what are you doing here? Well, nobody asked that in a class in college. What are you doing here? We all know what you're doing here. You're trying to get a job. We're just passing time, marking pieces of paper, writing papers, taking tests so we can get you out of here. We can make our living. You can go make your living. Goodbye. That's what we're doing here. And they didn't see it that way. So they wanted to know, what are you really doing here? What do you want? What's your life about? Do you know what's going to happen to you? If you don't succeed, what's going to happen? Are you afraid? So you were confronting these intense questions in light of the Odyssey or Herodotus or whatever you were reading, because in Herodotus there's serious questions being asked about, well, is money what it's all about? Are you happy if you have money? How do we determine if you're happy? What is happiness? And they weren't asking it in an egg-headed way. They weren't saying, what is happiness? Eudaimonic happiness. They were saying, are you happy? Do you think the pursuit of happiness is real? Can you pursue happiness? They were asking deep questions. So they would obviously relate it to Plato or whoever you were reading, but you were keenly aware in the circumstance that this was not just going to school. This was serious. This was about your life. This was going to answer some fundamental questions for you, and you were going to answer them for yourself, obviously. that you hadn't been allowed to do before.
Hmm. That's wonderful. I mean, in my reading of Dr. Senior's work and Dennis Quinn and the few essays I found out there that Frank Nelick authored, I get that same impression. It's the sense that they're taking you as a reader, in my case, or you as a student, seriously. They are calling you to responsibility, and it's the total opposite of what you find in a lot of instances these days, where, as you described, it's just sort of this utilitarian exchange that we kind of have to get through, and one hopes that you kind of will pursue some sort of further studies, but as far as what we're doing right here, we're just gonna kind of stick to what's in front of us, work through a certain amount of material, that way I can as a teacher or as a professor make sure that I don't have to deal with too much crap from my boss. Just to the point to where because a question like what are you doing here, like that, in some sense, like that takes a lifetime to answer, because the question is not just what are you doing here in this room, but what are you doing here on this earth, right? That's sort of the question behind the question. And so then you really get yourself thinking, and I can only imagine that when students are treated that way by professors, when they're called to responsibility, and when it's believed that you can really wrestle through those questions, by entering into stories, mythology, but also engaging with one another in very humane activities. Things like some of the things you already mentioned, or at least I think you mentioned, whether that be, just simply looking up at the sky, right? Just observing the very heavens that are above you and connecting that to stories that people have told for ages, or learning to properly interact with people of the other sex, right? in a context where we've forgotten the art of dance. These professors were reintroducing us to something like the waltz, or something as folksy and just ordinary as getting together for good old fashioned fare. These things are really quite profound, and sorely needed for us to live fully into the good life. So I think this may be a good way to transition into your story, because one of the things that I noticed in reading through your novel is that you really strike at the heart of what it's like to be a young adult on a college campus surrounded by beautiful ideas, but also beautiful bodies, right? So we are, of course, reading, through a syllabus that's full of, beautiful stories and beautiful ideas, and we're wrestling with that. But we're also living next to our peers. We're learning what it means to be a friend. We're learning what it means to, pursue romantic relationships, and we're learning how to essentially just be together as human beings. And I sense that that's something that you wanted to get into in your writing. You wanted to not just look at the facts of, this is what the program was like on paper, but this is what it actually felt like. Is that a fair read of what you were up to?
I think that's right. So, the pedagogy of the program was directed at sensory experience. It was directed at taking on real subjects like love, sex, disordered appetites, ordered appetites. What is civilization? What's hospitality? What's a good meal? All those things. And so the main character of the novel, Bernard, he's not a Catholic. He doesn't believe really. He's kind of agnostic. But he has a real love of poetry and literature and wit. And so he, sees this program, which he stumbles in on because he's following a beautiful girl that he's seen. And she just really has knocked him, for a loop. And so he's following her, and he just stumbles into this lecture, which he has no idea he's stumbling into. And it really takes him by storm. He's wonderstruck, as I put it in one chapter. I mean, it just, he can't believe that anybody would do all of this and put it all together, because he's always been wanting something like that, rather than the clever sort of stuff that he's used to engaging in with Western civilization and literature. Clever projects. But here it's all taken seriously. Philosophy, literature, poetry, experience. It's taken seriously. One thing leading to another. And so he's very taken by that, but he's also conflicted in many different ways. And of course, the story has to do with, the university and its attempts to do bad things to the program and try to get it, to go away, essentially, to investigate it, to send in spies and all that. And so he's kind of caught up in all that. So he's sort of he's like a kind of character in literature who's sort of hapless, and yet he's trying to determine his own fate. At the same time, he's a little bit hapless, and so in the midst of that, he's really taken with this program and with the professors, and he draws fairly close to everybody.
Well, everything that we know about the program, both from the professor's own writings to student testimonies, just seems to suggest that it was truly wonderful. And of course, I've chosen that word intentionally because in many ways, the program was aimed to revive a sense of wonder in the lives of its students. And so I'm just really sort of at a loss to figure out exactly what there is to hate about that. But that is something that you explore in your book, and that is something that has been detailed in other places. But I wonder if you could just go into the attacks that were levied against the program that eventually shut it down, attacks that were led by faculty, administration, among others.
Right. So, the program was not neutral. It wasn't beach balls and coloring books. They were taking on very serious issues of the day, such as relativism. Is there any truth? Is that true? If you say there's no truth, is that true? Are you being logical? What is pluralism? What is free speech? What is happiness? And that sounds like it's not that radical, but they were really taking on the ideas, the nostrums, the liberal orthodoxies of the day that said, look, we have discovered that there is no truth other than scientific, materialistic truth that you can measure in a microscope. And so we're going to take a very scientific approach to everything. We're not going to do anything basic like, reading and writing and arithmetic. We're going to do more advanced stuff. And, we're going to do it all in the service of relativism. That is to say, there is no truth, but anything you want to believe or take on or learn is fine. And the one silent exception to that is you can't learn, you can't propound the idea that we've taken a wrong direction in Western civilization and that the scientific materialism that we're in the middle of is valid. You can't take that on. You can't say, wait a minute, is that really valid? Ask the questions. Let's answer them maybe, but let's at least ask them. You're not even allowed to do that. So that prompted a response. You're not going to get a neutral response to that in that environment. In our environment today, it's going to be worse. You probably get raided by the FBI, but then there was a definite violent reaction among professors, among administrators. And then when things surfaced that some students were converting to Catholicism, that was like the last straw, they weren't going to put up with that for sure. So you had a number of things going on there, but the first and foremost was that this program in and of itself was an affront to the prevailing philosophy the pervasive and prevailing philosophy of the university. Secondly, it was popular. students were flocking to it. They loved it. It was challenging. That it had meaning. It had some essence to it. It was something that a lot of people were talking about on campus, and these other professors, they were lucky to get 2 students, and nobody cared about it really. People were pretty indifferent to a lot of the other classes. Now, that's not to say somebody wasn't excited about their biology class or what have you, but not on a programmatic basis, not on a hey, everybody's talking about this kind of basis. So there was a certain jealousy that cropped up, and then thirdly, there was this social problem of Jews becoming Catholics, and some even daring to travel to a monastery that some students had found in France, a traditional monastery of Salem, which we now know as Notre Dame de Fontainebleau, which is the mother house of what became Clear Creek Abbey, and Clear Creek Abbey in Oklahoma, which was mainly founded by students from the Integrated Humanities Program who had become French monks. So that, there was a definite social reaction among parents, among regents, among administrators, and then the press got involved to really question, should you have Catholics running around becoming Catholics, or telling other people to become Catholics, or letting other people become Catholics in a public university? So this idea of church and state coming into clash, confrontation with academic freedom and free speech. That was a big deal, and of course, this revealed the ugly underbelly of academic freedom, which is you have the academic freedom to teach anything you want if you're tenured, except the truth.
Yes, you explore a lot of that in your own way in your novel, and as we've mentioned, I think we've mentioned the name of Dr. Robert Carlson a couple of times here. He lays this out in some detail in his book Truth on Trial, and I think that one of the things we were talking about earlier pertaining to how professors treat students, my read on a lot of this is just, there seems to be a real failure on a lot of different fronts for people to take these young adults seriously. The idea that they have a free will, that they are making choices of their own, absolutely going through a time in life where you are presented with a lot of things that are new, or wrestling with things that are old that you've never seen before. But at the same time, you are a person who is sort of making choices and decisions, and as a result, sort of leading a life based on again your free will. And a lot of that seems to not be part of the consideration, at least in terms of the attacks levied against the program. And as you explore in your novel, you describe acts of espionage among students and various actions taken by administrators, faculty, and parents, as well as local church leaders trying to sabotage the program, or even rescue students from what they believe to be a real threat to the college and to the individual students involved. And I just wonder how much of that actually happened, and how much of that was more an invention for your purposes in the novel.
Well, okay, so I'm writing a novel here, and there's some fictionalization of events, but those were based on real things. There was sabotage going on, a little bit on both sides, but mostly from the university and their friends, their cutouts. You had Jewish groups and ACLU and other parent groups that formed to pressure the university to do something about this program, to suppress it somehow, to stop Catholicism from happening, however it was happening. And so yes, that did occur. In fact, before my time, there were even some deprogramming kidnappings. So you might recall that in the 70s, it was kind of a time rife with cults. You had Sung Moonies, they called them, and people in the airport selling flowers and the Hare Krishnas, and you had people getting into TM and EST and other, groups, and some of them were considered cults, and people had deprogrammers who would, they'd kidnap the people and get them deprogrammed and that kind of thing. So there was, at a certain point, things got pretty serious with the IHP, because while it was not, there was no direct proselytization going on, there was certainly no propaganda or indoctrination occurring in the classroom. There were a number of students who did convert or toyed with converting to Catholicism. The majority didn't, but there were a number who did, and this was alarming to Protestant Midwesterners. And let's face it, it was kind of based in the remnants of anti-Catholicism, which was always considered suspect, and some kind of weird mystery religion where you were doing odd things to hypnotize and brainwash people, and so it was not that surprising that there were these forces came to bear. And so I use that for dramatic purposes to frame some of the action of the novel, where people are trying to overcome that, or they're trying to do that, and the main character is kind of stuck in both worlds, so to speak, and trying to figure out if he's going to, which side he's going to really stick with. So that you get the sense of really both sides of the argument in a way. You can understand why people were angry. They don't want their kid becoming a monk, or just a Catholic for that matter, because it's not just becoming a Catholic. They would come home and tell their parents they were leading immoral lives, which, by the way, they were. I mean, some parents don't like that. My parents kind of thought it was neat. But some parents don't like to be told, hey, you're doing it all wrong. You're watching too much television. You're not leading a serious life. You used to read literature. You used to care about important ideas. What happened to you? Of course, I'm trying to tell my father, some of the stuff I remember one trip back to LA, and we're driving in traffic, and he starts quoting me the Aeneid in Latin. Arma verum quae con. He just starts in it, and I go, "How do you know that?" He goes, "I got that in high school. What are you talking about?"
Wow. Well, I can only imagine that there are many stories that can be told by students who went through a conversion into the church, and then when that happens in any situation where there is a family that either it's a Protestant family, or, as you mentioned, a Jewish family, or even a family that is just sort of knocked off kilter by the fact that this person in their lives have made a commitment to something that unfortunately does have a lot of as you mentioned, there's a long history of anti-Catholicism, really going back to the founding of our country, if you think about it. And so that's something that is worth keeping in mind, remembering the context. We're talking about a state university in Kansas, right? So I guess in some sense we have to have some amount of empathy for the shock to the system that I'm sure many parents and family members went through. But of course, that doesn't excuse the behavior of the administration of the school, because my understanding is that all of the accusations of proselytizing and, of course, brainwashing were completely unfounded. And yet, for some reason, the administration still buckled. Do you think you could touch on that a little bit?
Right. So, it's like politics today. You have people that are fronting as the leaders, but then you have, the really loud, angry, violent people behind them who won't be denied, what they want. And they've got power, they've got money behind them, they have, connections. And so the sort of puppet administrators are in a bad spot, because you're getting calls from the regents, you're getting calls from wealthy donors, you're being put on the hot seat. And so you're never going to take action against the professors, because that would violate academic freedom. So you've seen that in some of the materials where, the dean of the College of Liberal Arts was defending them, saying this is just pure academic freedom. They could say what they want in the classroom. And on the side, they can talk to students about Catholicism if they want. That's free speech, as long as it's not in the classroom. And which is exactly what happened. And so officially, they were being defended, but unofficially by committees and underhanded, behind the scenes people who used to be in power, who are operating some of the people that are in power. They're making changes, subtle changes to the program over time. And this is what we termed, Bob Carlson termed, and I use in the novel, death by administration. It's slow. It's like being euthanized eventually. So at no given time was the program suddenly suppressed. But, they took some of their office space. I saw this in politics when I was in the Bush administration. If they were unhappy with what you were doing, you didn't get the Christmas card from the president and the vice president. It's petty, but it's effective.
Yes, well, yeah, Dr. Carlson does go into detail describing even the responses of the professors. And if I remember correctly, I think it was Dennis Quinn who called it death by administration. And then when invited to teach for the new revised program, John Sr. said that he refused to kiss the hangman.
That's exactly right. Yeah, they were being subjected to a lot of innuendo. Their professional reputations were being called into question, but never directly by the administration. Never anything that you could really put your finger on and say, "I'm going to sue over that." I think there was talk about lawsuits, but nobody thought there was really anything you could do because it was coming from all directions. And that's the nature of the modern world. They kill you with 1,000 cuts. Nobody's willing to be brave and say, "No, let's just take a sword to this person." So you can't tell where it's coming from, a lot of it. And so in those days, there were some hearings. There were public hearings. There was some not so public hearings, committees. There were some debates. I attended those. And there were some people that said good things. I remember one philosophy professor was talking about academic freedom and how important it was, and he thought the program was doing some interesting things, not things that he would do, and then he ended his points in the debate and after all, there are worse things to become than a Catholic, which that's an amazing thing to say. But
yeah, I'd say let's explore this idea of the conversions a little bit deeper, because there were some pretty remarkable careers that came out of that in terms of people going on to be bishops or to commit their lives to religious orders. And that's not to mention, of course, all of the people, men and women, who went on to just lead faithful Catholic lives, raising Catholic families. And so I wonder if you could, setting aside the accusations of, proselytizing or some sort of brainwashing, can you speak to what you think was going on there in terms of why people going through this program will get to a point where they would even start to consider the claims of the church?
Well, the professors were unabashed about their philosophy and the fact that they were Catholic, and they would talk about medieval philosophy and the monasteries and Charlemagne, and we read those works, but they were all in context of where we were on the timeline of Western Civ. But there could be no doubt that they were certainly much more in favor of Augustine than they were of William James and the varieties of religious experience or what have you. And so, but we read the moderns, we read the ancients, and then the Christian era. And so, you knew where they were coming from. They did not fail to mention the truth or God or, bring up issues of moral theology or what have you, but they weren't in the way of doctrine. They weren't saying this is true and you got to follow this doctrine. It was just, they were necessary to the material, and they were worth talking about. Students who had come to understand the nature of the good life, who had come to understand the problem of the modern world and of the self and of the struggles with the self, who had come to understand that there were answers to these things in the writings of the philosophers and the poets and the great writers. And once you confronted something like Augustine, who had all of the powers of the intellect of the Roman world, he had it all, and it was evident in his writing, and it was a very pure and kind of historical sort of thing you were encountering. Once you saw that, for a lot of students, that was true for me, that beauty ever ancient, ever new, late have I loved thee, is a powerful drug. Let's put it that way. Once you imbibe that, you're not. I mean, most people are not going to just go, "Well, that was interesting. I'll go on and do something else now." They begin to explore, why is that so powerful? Why am I feeling all of these things? Why am I suddenly interested in what Western civilization is, and Catholicism is, and medieval scholasticism is? What is it? Why is it good? Why do I like this? Why do I like the art? Why do I like the sounds, the music, the stuff that I'm learning? Why is it having this profound effect on me? So students would then go and answer their own questions for themselves. Some of them would just go and show up at a church and get instruction. Others got to know people within the program. That was true for me. Great friendships were formed, and in the process of that, there was they had their own exchange of information, their own exchange of profound things in those relationships. And then you started to see a subculture that was very Catholic, and if you partook in that at all, you usually end up becoming Catholic. Some people would toy with it and then leave. Others might become Catholic and fall away, but a lot of people, it really took root because it spoke to them of all of the permanent things that they were lacking or seemed to be lacking in their life, and they saw in their families a certain fissures developing, and they wanted to lead good lives, and they saw that as a way. So that's the best I can describe it. Now, I have a friend who's a psychiatrist, and if he were here right now, he'd say, "Oh no, come on, they were proselytizing us," and I'm glad they did. He became Catholic. So I don't think that's true, but I understand the sentiment, which is, maybe the Holy Spirit was just working through them, and the truth, is such that when you encounter it and don't put up barriers, it's going to lead you where it's going to lead you. Especially if it's the powerful kind of Western civilization truths that we were studying. The other thing about the program, I'll say this, is the poetry, the singing, the stargazing, all of the different things that were adjunct to reading books, really served to open your heart. By which I mean, if you had a constricted heart, an inner life that was very constricted, and you weren't open to anything, and you didn't really want to know about any truth. You just wanted to get your A's and go on to wherever you were going. That's what I call a constricted heart. But when that heart opens, when it's fully dilated, it's open to truth, and truth then comes in. I don't know how to prove that, but the more open your heart is, and I'm not talking about just having an open mind like Huxley, doors of perception, but I'm talking about the heart itself, not the physical heart, but the inner life, the interior life of a person. Are they open to truth? Are they open to being affected and changed by it? And the program had this power to open your heart to the truth.
Yes, I think that's well said. I think I want to tweak your analogy a little bit. You said it's a powerful drug. Maybe it's actually just the first time you're not being drugged, and you're actually being served real food, right?
I
And
like
so
that.
you have this real food you're eating, and you're like, wow, what have I been eating my whole life? What have I been, what have I been supposedly sustaining myself on? Now I'm actually, this with this open heart, becoming more fully alive, entering more deeply into what it means to be a human being fully alive. And I'm actually being fed on something that will truly sustain me and will lead me. It makes sense that that sort of thing would lead you to our daily bread, right? Which we find in the Eucharist. And so, I can see why, students who are being introduced to reality, both through story and myth, but also through physical experiences, just exerting their bodies in ways that are good and enjoyable and meaningful, would say, okay, well, I want to apply this to every area of my life. And when you go home at night and start asking yourself the existential questions of who am I, where do I come from, where am I going? It makes a lot of sense to me that people would then want to explore questions of faith. But also, when you have professors that treat you like adults, that respect you, that call you to responsibility, you start saying, okay, well, I respect these men in these areas of their life. Maybe I should take serious their commitments in this one other area of their life, which clearly is informing everything else. And of course, in the context of the classroom at a state school, that is communicated in such a way that I don't think we could accurately call it, proselytizing, but it is an invitation of sorts, and that invitation, of course, is an invitation to the good life. And as we know as Catholics, the church is the steward of that life, because everything that is true, everything that is good, everything that is beautiful belongs to God. And so I can definitely see the trajectory there. Now, my understanding is that Dr. Senior in his private life and in his capacity as a churchman also taught a catechism class. During your time in the program, was that something that was available, and did you attend any of those?
Yeah. So, it's depicted in the novel that, the main characters at this house on Ohio Street, which is where I actually did live. And there would be these catechism classes, and they did exist. They came on Thursdays. John Senior would come and just have a conversation in the living room, and students would gather around. Those of us who lived there were there, and then a bunch of people would come, maybe 20, 30, 40 sometimes, and just have him. He would talk about Aquinas or something else. And they weren't literally catechism, but that's what they were called, catechism classes, for want of a better term. It was just John Senior discussing the Catholic faith and aspects of, Catholic philosophy and theology. And they were powerful. And they were, you were free to come or not come. So, yeah, so you have this other, as you said, there's this invitation. And if you're having a catechism class or something like a catechism class, and you're a professor and students who admire you are coming to that, even though there's nothing said in the classroom about it, there's no handouts, in class. One could say, well, that's a kind of form of using your authority as a teacher whom the students respect, to pass along, faith. And is that appropriate? And just even asking that question is strange, because he's not supposed to have a life. He's not supposed to be a Catholic and talk to people who want to hear about it. When I was a freshman, I would go to these brown bag lunches at the Anglican Church, where a professor I knew would go, and I just would attend. And they were very interesting discussions. They ranged from poetry to faith to whatever. There were a couple of professors there. All right, well, could they be deemed to be proselytizing?
Right.
I don't see how. So that I think that begs the question of, what is academic freedom? What are the rights of professors in a public university? And are there certain inadmissible things, like you're not allowed to be Catholic or to talk Catholic, or to talk, that there is truth that's
Right.
knowable, and
Yeah.
challenge the students to find it?
Well, I didn't intend to go into personal anecdotes like this, but you've encouraged me to share this one particular one. I think, as a preface, I'll say that I think anymore, and I'm several years after the fact of graduating, but I did go to graduate school later in life, and I still stay in touch with people who are still living student lives on college campuses. And I think anymore people are just terribly bored with professors who that's well, quite frankly, they don't really profess anything, right? So their title is sort of inaccurate. They're more like facilitators, I guess, of a class, right? Book hander-outers. Um, and there are bright spots. There are people who are still actively doing good work in schools, but by and large, um, rare is the professor who really captures your imagination and you say, I want to, um, I want to live a life like that man or that woman for that matter is living, right? There's something about the way this person, and it could be any given class, it could be you know, an underwater basket weaving class, but this teacher just that you can see the love, you can see that this informs an integrated approach to life, right? It fits in with everything. It's not just this thing that is detached or put in this this container, and we do it together, and then it doesn't really relate to any other part of life. And so, to go back to this idea of an integrated humanities program, it would make sense that students would see that this idea of integration wasn't just something that these three guys thought of, like, well, wouldn't it be neat if somehow we tied this all together and put a bow on it in the classroom? No, this is an invitation to an integrated life.
Yes.
And I think that if you have to be pretty heartless not to be attracted to that, right? You have to be pretty heartless not to at least be intrigued and kind of lean in a little bit and say, okay, well, I'd like to hear you again on this matter, so to speak, right? At the very least. And
Yeah.
so the anecdote is that I had a professor when I was at Virginia Tech, 40,000 students. So it sounds like twice as large as the school in Kansas. But I had this one professor who taught a Native American history class. It was a great class, and he invited all of us. He said this in the classroom. He said, "Listen, I'm a Blackfoot, leader in the Blackfoot tribe community, and my family and our relatives, we host a sweat lodge on my property, and you're all invited." And I was one of a few students that actually showed up to it. But that was intriguing. It's like, okay, like all these things you talk about in class, you know, um, you actually live this outside of this room. Well, that's terribly interesting. Like, I'd like to know more about that. And so, this going back to these three professors, the idea that students, again, this is a respect of the free will of the students, that they would want to pursue something like Catholicism further. Like, it doesn't have to be as simple as, well, they were just brainwashed. No, maybe they're just alive and they're like, huh, I would like to know more about that. And then, of
Yeah.
course, my understanding is that there was a really really wonderful priest. Moriarty, was that his name, Father Moriarty?
Yeah, Father James Moriarty. There were brothers, Moriarty brothers, but James was the main one, I guess you would say. And
Well,
there
could
were
you say
a
more about
number
that?
of priests that were acolytes of the program, and I got to know them. Moriarty was a little before my time,
Hmm.
and he had since been transferred to I knew him. I mean, I met him, but we knew other priests that were attached to the program informally, and that was important, because you don't want to just hear about Catholicism in a vacuum. You want to meet some real solid people that espouse this, if you're going to pursue it. And so that was important. But you're absolutely right. I think the professors were powerful personalities, but they were not trying to get people converted. They weren't running around and saying, okay, well, when are you going to show up to catechism? Or there was none of that. In fact, when I had the interest in the church, from reading Augustine. I've made an appointment with Dr. Senior to talk about it. I was kind of disturbed. I was concerned. I didn't know what to do. And rather than him usher me in, here, come right in here and we'll make you Catholic, he said, well, don't rush it. If it's real, it'll happen. It'll be, like riding a wave. Just ride it and go with it. And almost as an afterthought, he said, you might pray a, Hail Mary. I said, what's that? So he wrote it out for me, and and then I actually did that at one point. And by the way, don't do that unless you want to end up Catholic. But because you're gonna experience something if you're open to it. And so that's what happened. I think there was a notion among the opponents of the program, both inside and outside the university, that you just can't ever do any of this, ever. None of this, not a word of it. Don't speak about truth being real in class. Don't invite people to catechisms. Don't even allow them to come even if they're not invited. Don't let them become Catholic or anything else except, radical Marxist, lesbian, that's okay. But whatever you do, I think there's that notion here that's simple. You just can't do that. Sorry.
Yeah.
And I think we have the same thing today in society, that's run rampant throughout the schools, but also in our civic life, which is you can't talk about babies shouldn't be killed.
Right.
What? Those are human beings, aren't they? Maybe.
I tell you what, that's exactly right. I mean, I've had experiences like this myself in context that you would think, we would be able to, again, not only just under the guise of academic freedom, but just, what are we even supposed to be doing, as college students at a university, right? I mean, aren't we supposed to be, wrestling with these ideas, with these concepts? Aren't we supposed to be, thinking and asking hard questions? But, a lot of these things are shut down rather quickly because of, whether it be political correctness or, quite frankly, I would just say cowardice on behalf of the professors who, are probably receiving a lot of pressure from the administration, who's receiving a lot of pressure from, like you said, donors or parents or any more. There a lot of people just seem to skip over the student, right? Who let's just go back to this, like, is an adult, by the way, right? And so one of the things I noticed in reading through a lot of the accounts of the program is that parents and local leaders were just going straight to the administration, skipping over the students, skipping over the professors themselves, right? It's like, this is the kind of stuff you see, in middle schools, right? And I taught middle school. And still, I would say, if you want to talk to me about your grade or that test, you come talk to me, right? Right? Like, it doesn't always has to be mommy or daddy, right? Coming to have this conversation with me. Again, it's a call to responsibility. And so to see this played out, in the halls of higher education is really embarrassing. But it's something that, as you've mentioned, is still going on to this day. In so many ways, it's a story that is being played out in places all over the world. I want to return here briefly to your book. And then as we move towards the end of our conversation, I want you to tell us a little bit about the legacy of the program, specifically with some of the schools that you've been involved with. But as a return to the novel, I want to mention another book written by William H. Wisner, Whither the Postmodern Library.
Yes.
And this is a wonderful book for many different reasons, but he spends some time reflecting on his time in the Integrated Humanities Program. And one of the things he does here, which I haven't seen anywhere else except in your novel, is he makes the point to tell a story about going out on one of these stargazing sessions and seeing this young lady tell the story of the Greek myth that was associated with the constellation that they were considering during this period of observational astronomy. And he just describes how he was struck by her beauty in the moonlight and how he just fell in love with this girl, just listening to her, tell this story. They were sharing this experience together. And I think that is just not only so accurate to, what oftentimes happens when, you are, you know, a young, college student who is, out in nature with, with people who are oriented in the same direction as you are, and who are sharing in beautiful ideas and beautiful stories. You start to your heart is pricked. Um, and also, of course, there's of course the physical element there. Of course, the hormones and everything is sort of primed for all of that to be integrated, let's say, towards something that is good. Like, hey, maybe I should pursue a relationship with this woman. Maybe we should get married. Maybe we should have a family. Maybe we, and all these ideas start racing, and all of that happens right on the hill under the stars. And sadly, I think um, we don't create environments or opportunities for young people to be in places like that much anymore. And so, I think in some sense, the professors were creating opportunities for people to find other people to um, start lives with. And my understanding is that, many relationships were formed. Did you meet your wife in the program?
Yes, she came into the church a year after I did. She went into
Yeah.
the program. She was there um, at the same time I was, but I was a year ahead of her in the program. And I actually had met her through a close friend of mine, the one I was talking about, who became a psychiatrist, and his girlfriend, who became his wife and my wife were best friends growing up. So that's how I knew them, but also knew them through the program. And so, yes, I think what you're describing is very much a part of the experience of the program. In the integration of knowledge, there's also the integration of living and of your senses and of your, human desires and of your, looking forward to a real life, and things lead where they lead. And so love is one of those things. And it's an important thing. It's what, God put there, in creating Eve for Adam. Is this tremendous attraction, this tremendous force that brings about, the plan of God through creation. So that was very much a part of the program. We were not at all unaware of that. In other words, first thing you learned in the program was, my love is like a red, red rose. He would sing, the Bobby Burns song, my love is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. You're singing love songs, you're learning love poetry. It's not all of that, of course. There's a lot of other, the world is too much with us and so forth. But so, as young men and young women, we're very attracted to that ethic, of living and of the good life. So I really wanted to depict that was a big factor, that was a big force, because, again, John Sr. and the program were about revealing to us reality, that the real is really real and it's good. Well, why is there something rather than nothing? It's good, it's real, it's not in your head. And so women are certainly not in your head. They're real beings, or women looking at men, those men are real beings. They're hard to control, So that was the love aspect and the pursuit aspect was an important part of the story, because it does lead the character into the truth, so to speak.
That's wonderful. So you were a part of the founding board of Wyoming Catholic College, and you also sit on the board of Thomas More College of the Liberal Arts in New Hampshire. To what extent would you say that your experience in the IHP has informed your desire to be a part of those programs? And I guess could you maybe draw some connecting lines in terms of maybe where these programs are descendants of the work of these three professors?
Yes. So I I got involved with the founding of Wyoming Catholic through my friendship with Bob Carlson, and we would go to Italy, and on these trips, we began to talk about forming an IHP, because he was teaching something like that at Casper College in Wyoming. but it was limited what he could do there. And so my son at the time was at a ranch studying, going through high school at a ranch. Halftime, he would do, horsemanship and all these other things, and then halftime, do school. And the experience that he had there was so powerful. And of course, my experience of it too, with him, just going there visiting, was amazing. The outdoors was so gorgeous, and it was so stark and beautiful. The breaking horses and learning how to do that, and ride, cut cows in the mountains, and face grizzly bears and all that. So it was such an amazing educational experience for him. And so I began to talk to Bob about, what if we founded an IHP like college, but added in what they're doing at the Mount Carmel Youth Ranch. In other words, the outdoors, the great books and the great outdoors. What if we, made that part of the program? And so, not only stargazing, but, grizzly gazing, if you will, mountain climbing, horsemanship, these things that are hard, that people are afraid of, but they really bring you out of yourself, like Winston Churchill said, that there's something about the outside of a horse that is good for the inside of a man, and a woman, and so we wanted to bring together those ideas, the great books, but also the power of nature. And so, as we went along, and I did a white paper on all of this, and, we were basically looking at founding what we were kind of calling John Senior College. Eventually got called Wyoming Catholic, but, the working name was John Senior College. And, one of the things we came up with was, Cardinal Newman on horseback, so the idea of the university, but then you're on horseback. Wow. So that's how that came to be. And so then he designed he did the philosophic statement. We had a committee, and the bishop got involved, and, we had a founding committee. So it was all decided upon. So it's popular. Students, they never want for students there. So I think that's been a great experience. Would I say that it is precisely the IHP? No, but it certainly incorporates a lot of the ideas and a lot of the pedagogy and the integration, not only within the subjects, but also with nature. And I think that's the uniqueness of it, is that you have beautiful nature there that's more beautiful than anything we had in Kansas, I'll tell you that. Although, there's a real beauty to the prairie, but it's different, And so that, now with Thomas More College, again, it's a tremendous college program with the liberal arts emphasized, the great books emphasized, and poetry and song are very much in operation there. They have guilds. So they also have, outdoor activities and farming and other woodworking and other kinds of guilds that bring that practical side to the educational, the asperity of the educational side, to make it more integrated. In my time on the board there, which is I think I've been on 6 years ish. There's been a real attempt by William Fay, the president, and others in the college to bring in more of the IHP. They published, for instance, Father Bethel's book on John Senior. That's Thomas More Press. They took on. I had a bunch of old. I told you about this. The copies of John Senior's poetry, Pale Horse Easy Rider, and nobody was going to buy them. 200 copies or whatever. So the Thomas More College took that on, and they sold them all. They did a review about it and then sold them. So they really buy into, the philosophical pedagogy of John Senior and the importance of IHP and its place in, the American educational history. And so that's been rewarding to be a part of that. And so, there's some other projects we're working on now as well. In addition, there's a program out in New Mexico, an outdoor program that Thomas More students are going to. So they're starting to incorporate even more of that. element into what they're doing. So that's an example of where you can kind of seed in the IHP and John Senior's kind of philosophy without doing it in a public university or even in a founding a Catholic college based on it. But you can bring in those ideas and make them work.
That's wonderful. Well, to round out our conversation, I wonder if we could direct our attention to listeners who are currently teaching, whether that be in a school or let's even consider the homeschooling parents. Anyone who has been inspired by the story of these three educators. For someone who received a good education sitting at the feet and learning from the good example of these three men, what would you want to say to educators today? Do you have anything that you'd like to ask of them, or any words of encouragement, anything that you would like to see them take on specifically if they want to follow in the footsteps, so to speak, of these three men?
Yeah, I think it's difficult for Catholic educators today to say, we're gonna memorize poetry, we're gonna internalize great words and great ideas through those who wrote them, and we're going to recite them, and we're going to learn songs, and we're going to delight in living, and we're going to learn arts of culture, because you used a word earlier, utilitarianism. It has crept into everything in this country, and it's in the air we breathe. And so a lot of us unwittingly have become Catholic utilitarians. If it doesn't have a monetary or job related, outcome, or it's not going to get me into clubs or, associations that are going to get me jobs, what's the worth? If it's not engineering or math or, STEM, what's the worth of this? And so you encounter this sometimes even among Catholics who are, serious Orthodox Catholics, but they still are, haven't quite put the axe to the root of that utilitarianism, of that, sort of Protestant work ethic, if you will. And yet we need to do that if we're going to have great educators. We need to have wonder and poetry and song, and obviously the great books and the good books. Now, good books, by that we mean everything from Mother Goose through Dickens to Tolstoy to Dostoevsky. Of course, Dostoevsky and Tolstoy might find their way into the great books, but these things that every man who's considered educated, and that includes Belloc and Chesterton, but if you were educated 50 years ago, you knew these people. You knew who they were, and you'd read them. You might not have read all of them, but you'd read them. And so I think we have to, as educators, be willing to go there and to try to defend why we're doing this to parents who might be thinking, well, how are they going to get into a college? And what's going to happen with, So, for example, we have a program that was inspired by the Integrated Humanities Program. It's the St. Gregory's Academy in Pennsylvania. They do the great books, but they do this other aspect that we're talking about, the gymnastic, the Aristotelian, in the outdoors, the poetry, song. A lot of that's taken care of in the culture of the students themselves. They keep passing it on from generation to generation of Irish folk songs and whatnot. But so another program that was inspired by the IHP is St. Martin's Academy in Kansas, where they're doing a lot of agriculture in addition, and outdoor stuff, canoeing and whatnot, building canoes and then canoeing. But agriculture, serious agriculture, to go along with their study of the liberal arts. And that's tremendous because, look, most of us don't know how to do anything. So I would encourage teachers in homeschooling and those who are founding schools and those who are trying to do good work, bring some, and this sounds like I'm being utilitarian, I'm not, but bring something useful in the sense of you'll know how to do something with your hands. My kids were in a Montessori program back in Kansas before I came to DC to work in the Bush administration. And they were learning, books, good, very, very fine books and everything, but they also had this practicum and they learned mechanics. And my son, my second oldest, who's, a bit of a intellectual, if you will, he can change oil, he can change brakes, he can put in pergo flooring, which requires mathematical precision like I don't have. He got that from a simple Montessori school program, also his own, personal, abilities, but he would never have learned any of that. He didn't learn it from me. I don't know how to do anything mechanical. I can turn a screwdriver. So I think those things are very important. How do you grow things? What is a plant? How does it grow? Food, where does it come from? So these things I think are very important to bring into the education of students because, again, people go into the world and they're lost. They don't know how to do anything. They don't have skills. They don't know what everything is. And they're just kind of like, go to college, read a lot of books. See you later. We don't want to do that. We want to give them, real tools for life, real tools for the good life. So that's what I would encourage.
Well, I think that's really good advice, and I would just want to echo all of the positive things you said about those programs, and these are people that I'm in conversation with, and I want to encourage parents in particular to consider these programs for the young children they have in their lives, and then I'd like to speak to the young adults who are looking for what might be next in terms of their schooling. And just really take a deep look into what's on offer in some of these programs, because as you mentioned earlier in your remarks, there are places and there are a handful of professors here and there at some of these larger or, more sort of widely regarded as distinguished schools historically, anyhow. But there can be some real hidden gems like this one we've been discussing that existed in Kansas. And even though it was shut down, it kind of really just went to seed, right? And all those seeds just sort of scattered and went all over the world and have had a really big impact on not just institutions, but also individual families. And so, it's a call to just really consider the type of people that you want to be around, the type of teachers that you want to learn from, and hopefully by retelling the story of the Integrated Humanities Program, we can remind people that number one, they're not alone in their pursuit of truth. Reality is really real, and you can live into it. So maybe the last thing I'll say is start bringing some of these festive elements and some of this folk culture back into your family life, whether that be going out and picking some apples and making apple butter, or and inviting your neighbors over, or just having a dinner on the grounds and inviting some people with some stringed instruments to come over and play some bluegrass music, or getting together and singing, or somehow re-engaging culture through food, through music and fellowship. I think those things are not to be missed, and I think the three professors would see that as a part of what they were trying to invite their students into, this invitation into the good life. So
I agree with you.
I want to encourage people to buy your book. I'm going to go ahead and just do that for you. You can find it on Mr. Bloch's website, which is scottbloch, BLOCH.com, scottbloch.com. And I understand it's also available through Barnes & Noble. And if you would like Jeff Bezos to be able to go to space again, we all want, you could buy it on Amazon.
The Evil Empire does have it, and you can get it direct from the publisher too, Wycliffe and Stock. But it's real easy to go on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or my website, which has links to those. But I encourage people to embrace the story and to bring it into their lives, and to definitely sing and do poetry and have get-togethers like Trey is talking about. So important. It just brings you out of yourself and into the real world of creation. And so we want to do that.
Mr. Scott Bloch, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.